The Vietnam War marked a turning point in modern military aviation. Unlike previous conflicts, the dense jungles and mountainous terrain of Vietnam made traditional ground-based warfare difficult for U.S. forces. Roads were often non-existent or mined, rivers were difficult to navigate, and the enemy could blend seamlessly into civilian populations and natural cover. To overcome these challenges, the U.S. Army adopted the concept of air mobility, leveraging helicopters to transport troops, supplies, and firepower directly into combat zones. This innovation gave rise to one of the most dangerous military roles in history, the helicopter door gunner. The door gunner's position was emblematic of both the strategic brilliance and extreme risk of air mobile operations. Seated in the open doorway of the UH-1 Huey helicopter, the gunner operated an M60 machine gun or later miniguns to provide suppressive fire for troops entering or leaving hostile zones. Unlike other soldiers, door gunners had no cover beyond a thin seat harness and their personal flak jacket. They were exposed not only to enemy fire, but also to the mechanical dangers of operating heavy machine guns from a moving, vibrating aircraft. Every mission into a contested landing zone, or hot LZ, carried a near-constant threat of injury or death. The statistics reflect the peril inherent in this role. During the Vietnam War, approximately 5,000 helicopters were destroyed or damaged in combat operations, and thousands of crew members, including pilots, crew chiefs, medics, and door gunners, were killed or wounded. While pilots faced high risks, door gunners were often among the first to be struck in enemy attacks due to their exposed position. Their casualty rates were notably higher than many other frontline roles, earning them a reputation for courage under fire unmatched by most ground combat units. The danger of the door gunner role was compounded by the operational environment. Helicopters often flew at low altitudes over dense jungle, making them highly visible to small arms fire, RPGs, and anti-aircraft artillery. Enemy forces, including Viet Cong guerrillas and North Vietnamese army units, developed specific tactics to target low-flying helicopters, frequently ambushing them during troop insertions or extractions. The combination of slow-moving, lightly armored helicopters and highly motivated, tactically sophisticated enemy forces created a near-perfect storm of risk for door gunners. Despite the danger, the door gunner role was essential. These soldiers were tasked with suppressing enemy fire, covering troop movements, protecting Medevac missions, and sometimes delivering critical firepower that determined the outcome of engagements. Their work required exceptional focus, steady hands, and a willingness to operate under conditions most combatants would consider intolerable.
Helicopter technology, the UH-1 Huey, and its armament. The door gunner's role was inseparable from the technology that made air mobile operations possible. Central to Vietnam-era helicopter warfare was the Bell UH-1 Iroquois, colloquially known as the Huey. Introduced in the late 1950s, the UH-1 was a versatile medium-lift utility helicopter designed to transport troops, carry cargo, and serve as a gunship. Its combination of reliability, maneuverability, and ease of maintenance made it the backbone of U.S. Army aviation operations in Vietnam. The Huey could carry up to 14 troops, in addition to the pilot and co-pilot, or various configurations of equipment depending on mission requirements. Its single turboshaft engine provided sufficient power to navigate the jungles and mountains of Southeast Asia, but it offered minimal armor protection, leaving crew members highly vulnerable to small arms and rocket fire. The door gunner's primary weapon was the M60 machine gun, a belt-fed, general-purpose weapon capable of firing approximately 500 to 600 rounds per minute. The M60 was mounted on a swiveling pintle, allowing the gunner to cover wide arcs of fire outside the helicopter. In some gunship variants, door gunners operated twin M60s, or later in the war, M134 miniguns, capable of extremely high rates of fire. While powerful, these weapons were heavy and required skill to operate effectively from a vibrating, moving aircraft. Mismanagement or jamming could be fatal for both the gunner and the helicopter crew. The Huey's design facilitated rapid troop deployment, but also made door gunners acutely exposed. The open doors provided a full field of fire, which was critical for covering troops during landings, but offered no shielding from bullets, shrapnel, or the rotor downwash. Helicopters frequently operated at low altitudes, sometimes below 50 feet, over jungle and rough terrain, increasing the likelihood of enemy contact. Door gunners had to react instantaneously to threats from any direction. Ground fire from ahead, flanks, or even from elevated positions in trees or hills. Despite these dangers, the technological synergy of the Huey and the door gunner created a new paradigm in modern warfare. The combination of mobility, firepower, and rapid deployment allowed the U.S. Army to conduct assaults deep in enemy territory, reach otherwise inaccessible areas, and maintain operational pressure on Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces. Door gunners were essential to this capability, providing the suppressive fire that allowed helicopters to land, extract, and complete missions that would have been impossible for ground units alone.
Helicopter door gunners in Vietnam served as the linchpins of air-mobile firepower. Their job was deceptively simple, in theory, but harrowingly complex in practice. Provide immediate, accurate, suppressive fire to protect the helicopter and its passengers. Whether flying into a landing zone under fire, extracting wounded soldiers, or escorting gunship missions, the door gunner was both defender and combatant, an exposed sentinel guarding the aircraft's lifeline. Each UH-1 Huey typically operated with a four-man crew: a pilot, co-pilot, crew chief, and door gunner. The pilot and co-pilot controlled the helicopter and navigation, while the crew chief managed maintenance and mechanical readiness, often serving as one of the two gunners. In many missions, both sides of the Huey were equipped with door-mounted machine guns, manned by the crew chief on one side and the gunner on the other. The door gunner's duties extended far beyond shooting. Before every mission, gunners prepared ammunition belts, inspected and mounted their weapons, checked communications gear, and secured the cabin for flight. Once airborne, they were responsible for maintaining situational awareness, scanning terrain for muzzle flashes, smoke, or movement that could indicate enemy presence. Communication between the gunner and pilots was vital. A gunner's early warning could mean the difference between a successful landing and a deadly ambush. When approaching a landing zone, the door gunners were the first to open fire, creating what soldiers called a wall of lead, continuous suppressive fire intended to neutralize enemy positions and provide cover for troops exiting the helicopter. Timing was everything. Fire too early and the rounds would be wasted. Fire too late and ground troops would be exposed. The gunners had to balance aggression with precision, adjusting for wind, helicopter speed, and the uneven terrain below. In addition to combat assaults, door gunners played critical roles in medical evacuation, or Medevac, and resupply missions. During Medevac flights, they defended unarmed or lightly armed helicopters carrying wounded soldiers. Their ability to lay down defensive fire often determined whether both the wounded and the medics survived the extraction. In these missions, gunners showed extraordinary composure under conditions where a single well-placed enemy round could disable the aircraft or ignite fuel tanks. The operational tempo was relentless. Helicopter units, particularly those in the 1st Cavalry Division, Air Mobile, and 101st Airborne Division, flew multiple missions per day. Door gunners often logged hundreds of hours a month, many of them under fire. Rest was scarce, and fatigue was a constant enemy. The combination of high adrenaline combat and physical exhaustion wore heavily on even the most seasoned gunners. Yet, despite these conditions, morale among air crews was often high, driven by camaraderie and the shared understanding that their survival depended on each other's vigilance and skill. The Vietnam battlefield was unlike any that had come before. The tactical advantage of air mobility, the ability to deliver troops anywhere within minutes, was offset by the extreme vulnerability of helicopters to concentrated ground fire. Door gunners stood at the center of this paradox, fighting in a combat environment that statistically favored the enemy. The mathematical reality of helicopter warfare in Vietnam was unforgiving. Helicopters typically approach landing zones at speeds between 60 and 90 knots, 70 to 100 miles per hour, and altitudes below 300 feet. At these speeds and altitudes, the aircraft presented large, slow-moving targets to enemy gunners. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army learned to exploit this vulnerability. By studying helicopter approach patterns, they positioned small arms and machine gun nests along likely flight paths, ensuring crossfire coverage of incoming Hueys. Even light weapons were deadly against helicopters. The thin aluminum skin of the UH-1 provided little protection against 7.62mm rounds, and even rifle fire could disable hydraulics, puncture fuel tanks, or injure crew members. The introduction of the RPG-2 and RPG-7 rocket-propelled grenades further increased the danger. A single rocket strike could destroy or cripple a helicopter, often causing catastrophic fires. By 1968, the widespread use of anti-aircraft machine guns, such as the Soviet-made DSHK 12.7mm, turned many landing zones into lethal traps. Statistical analyses later conducted by U.S. Army aviation historians revealed that the majority of helicopter losses occurred within 5 miles of landing zones, precisely where door gunners were most active. In these high-risk zones, exposure times of even a few seconds could prove fatal. The survival odds for door gunners were determined by multiple variables: altitude, speed, direction of approach, number of enemy positions, and sheer luck. Helicopters did not fly alone. Missions typically involved formations of multiple aircraft, some carrying troops, slicks, others providing escort fire, gunships. Yet once the troop transports descended into an LZ, those escorts could do little to shield them from concentrated ground fire. The door gunner's role at that moment became the decisive line of defense. During combat insertions, pilots executed a maneuver called the flare, a rapid deceleration and descent into the LZ. As the helicopter flared, its nose rose, exposing the underside and reducing forward speed, making it a stationary target for several seconds. Door gunners used this moment to unleash continuous bursts of suppressive fire, often blind, directed toward muzzle flashes or suspected enemy positions. The goal was not precise marksmanship, but saturation, to suppress enemy fire long enough for the helicopter to land, unload troops, and take off again. The chaos of these operations cannot be overstated. The air filled with the sound of engines, gunfire, explosions, and radio chatter. Dust and rotor wash obscured vision, making target identification nearly impossible. Gunners often fired on instinct, reacting to movement or flashes of light. Many veterans described missions where the door gunner's tracer rounds illuminated a deadly ballet of bullets crisscrossing the landing zone, green tracers from the Huey's M60s and red tracers from enemy weapons converging in midair. By the war's end, the data told a grim story. Over 2,700 U.S. helicopter crew members were killed in action, and thousands more were wounded. A significant portion of these casualties were door gunners and crew chiefs. Their exposure, courage, and endurance made them indispensable, but also tragically expendable in the brutal arithmetic of Vietnam's helicopter war.
The Vietnam battlefield was unlike any that had come before. The tactical advantage of air mobility, the ability to deliver troops anywhere within minutes, was offset by the extreme vulnerability of helicopters to concentrated ground fire. Door gunners stood at the center of this paradox, fighting in a combat environment that statistically favored the enemy. The mathematical reality of helicopter warfare in Vietnam was unforgiving. Helicopters typically approached landing zone at speeds between 60 and 90 knots, 70 to 100 miles per hour, and altitudes below 300 feet. At these speeds and altitudes, the aircraft presented large, slow-moving targets to enemy gunners. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army learned to exploit this vulnerability. By studying helicopter approach patterns, they positioned small arms and machine gun nests along likely flight paths, ensuring crossfire coverage of incoming Hueys. Even light weapons were deadly against helicopters. The thin aluminum skin of the UH-1 provided little protection against 7.62mm rounds, and even rifle fire could disable hydraulics, puncture fuel tanks, or injure crew members. The introduction of the RPG-2 and RPG-7 rocket-propelled grenades further increased the danger. A single rocket strike could destroy or cripple a helicopter, often causing catastrophic fires. By 1968, the widespread use of anti-aircraft machine guns such as the Soviet-made DSHK 12.7mm turned many landing zones into lethal traps. Statistical analyses later conducted by U.S. Army aviation historians revealed that the majority of helicopter losses occurred within 5 miles of landing zones, precisely where door gunners were most active. In these high-risk zones, exposure times of even a few seconds could prove fatal. The survival odds for door gunners were determined by multiple variables: altitude, speed, direction of approach, number of enemy positions, and sheer luck. Helicopters did not fly alone. Missions typically involved formations of multiple aircraft, some carrying troops, slicks, others providing escort fire, gunships. Yet once the troop transports descended into an LZ, those escorts could do little to shield them from concentrated ground fire. The door gunner's role at that moment became the decisive line of defense. During combat insertions, pilots executed a maneuver called the flare, a rapid deceleration and descent into the LZ. As the helicopter flared, its nose rose, exposing the underside and reducing forward speed, making it a stationary target for several seconds. Door gunners used this moment to unleash continuous bursts of suppressive fire, often blind, directed toward muzzle flashes or suspected enemy positions. The goal was not precise marksmanship, but saturation, to suppress enemy fire long enough for the helicopter to land, unload troops, and take off again. The chaos of these operations cannot be overstated. The air filled with the sound of engines, gunfire, explosions, and radio chatter. Dust and rotor wash obscured vision, making target identification nearly impossible. Gunners often fired on instinct, reacting to movement or flashes of light. Many veterans described missions where the door gunner's tracer rounds illuminated a deadly ballet of bullets crisscrossing the landing zone, green tracers from the Huey's M60s and red tracers from enemy weapons converging in midair. Despite all precautions, losses were inevitable. When a helicopter was hit, the door gunner's lost responsibility was often to protect the crew during crash landings. Many gunners died performing this duty, staying at their guns until impact, or while covering escaping passengers from burning wreckage. Their survival odds in a downed helicopter were among the lowest of any combat role in Vietnam. By the war's end, the data told a grim story. Over 2,700 U.S. helicopter crew members were killed in action, and thousands more were wounded. A significant portion of these casualties were door gunners and crew chiefs. Their exposure, courage, and endurance made them indispensable, but also tragically expendable in the brutal arithmetic of Vietnam's helicopter war.
Historical battles, door gunners in the crucible of Vietnam. The Vietnam War's most iconic battles demonstrated both the strength and fragility of helicopter warfare. Among them, the Battle of UH-1 in November 1965 stands as the defining moment, the first major engagement between the U.S. Army and the North Vietnamese Army, NVA. It was here, in the rugged terrain of the UH-1 Valley in the Central Highlands, that helicopter door gunners proved their indispensability under the harshest conditions imaginable. The Battle of UH-1, 1965. The U.S. 1st Cavalry Division Air Mobile pioneered the use of helicopters as a primary means of troop movement and combat support. The Hueys ferried troops into the remote landing zone designated LZ X-ray, deep in enemy-held territory. From the outset, the mission exposed every vulnerability of the new air mobile strategy. As the first waves of Hueys descended, NVA forces opened fire from concealed positions in the surrounding hills, targeting the aircraft as they flared for landing. Door gunners on those initial flights faced withering fire. Armed with M60s, they poured thousands of rounds into the tree line to suppress enemy positions. Their success was measured not in kills, but in seconds gained, precious moments allowing soldiers to disembark and form a defensive perimeter. Many gunners continued firing as their helicopters took off, strafing the jungle canopy to protect later flights. Despite these efforts, losses mounted. Several helicopters were hit during the first day of fighting. The pilots maneuvered desperately to extract the wounded, often relying on door gunners to lay down covering fire during takeoffs under fire. These rescue attempts highlighted both the bravery and exposure of the gunners. They fired continuously while hovering only a few feet above the ground, sometimes engaging enemy troops at point-blank range. The battle demonstrated that door gunners were not passive defenders, but active participants in shaping battlefield outcomes. Their suppressive fire frequently meant the difference between a successful landing and a destroyed aircraft. Yet UH-1 also revealed the inherent cost of such operations. Helicopters were fragile, and the open-door firing positions left little margin for error. The U.S. military learned valuable lessons from UH-1 about air assault tactics, but they came at a terrible price in crew lives. Other key engagements. Throughout the war, similar scenes unfolded in countless engagements: Khe Sanh, Dak To, Hamburger Hill, and operations across the Mekong Delta. In each, helicopters served as the lifeline of U.S. forces, and door gunners were their guardians. Khe Sanh, 1968, during the prolonged siege, helicopters were the only reliable means of resupply. Door gunners flew through intense anti-aircraft fire to deliver ammunition and extract casualties. Many aircraft were hit by heavy 12.7mm DSHK fire, which could penetrate both the fuselage and personnel. Door gunners often had to fire while managing their own injuries, maintaining defensive cover until landing or crash evacuation.
Medevac operations. Perhaps no missions better exemplified courage than medical evacuation flights. Although Geneva Conventions designated medevac aircraft as non-combatants, in Vietnam the enemy did not always honor that rule. Unarmed dust-off medevacs frequently came under fire, and door gunners in escorting helicopters risked their lives to defend them. Many were killed protecting aircraft carrying wounded soldiers and medics, cementing their reputation as some of the war's bravest combatants. By the late 1960s, U.S. tactics evolved. Armed escorts became standard, landing zones were prepared with artillery fire, and approach patterns varied to reduce predictability. However, no amount of tactical innovation could eliminate the fundamental danger. Helicopters remained slow, unarmored, and required to fly into enemy fire to accomplish their missions. For the door gunners, every sortie was a calculated gamble with survival. Casualty analysis: the human cost of helicopter warfare in Vietnam. The human cost of helicopter warfare in Vietnam was staggering. Between 1962 and 1973, the U.S. Army Aviation recorded over 12,000 helicopter crashes and losses, with more than 5,000 aircraft destroyed in combat. The U.S. Army Aviation Association and later Defense Department analyses estimated that approximately 2,700 aircrew members, pilots, crew chiefs, and door gunners were killed during the conflict. Thousands more suffered wounds, burns, or lifelong disabilities. While specific statistics isolating door gunners are difficult to separate from total aircrew losses, operational data and veteran records indicate that door gunners faced among the highest per-mission casualty probabilities of any role in Vietnam. Estimates suggest that for every 100 door gunners deployed, nearly 30% became casualties, killed or wounded during their tours, a rate several times higher than that of infantrymen on the ground. Factors contributing to high casualty rates. 1. Exposure. Unlike pilots enclosed in cockpit armor plating, door gunners were seated in open doorways with no ballistic shielding. Even small-caliber rounds could be lethal. A single ricochet could strike a gunner or ignite ammunition belts beside them. 2. Altitude and range. Most helicopter operations occurred below 300 feet, often at treetop level, well within effective range of enemy small arms and heavy machine guns. This put gunners in the direct line of fire for extended periods during approach and departure. 3. Enemy firepower. The widespread use of Soviet and Chinese-supplied weapons, AK-47s, RPD machine guns and RPGs, and DSHK heavy machine guns, created dense fields of fire. In some regions, particularly along the Ho Chi Minh Trail and Mekong Delta, enemy gunners became highly adept at ambushing helicopters. 4. Limited armor and redundancy.
The UH-1's lightweight frame meant minimal armor protection. Fuel tanks, control lines, and engine components were exposed. When hit, fire or mechanical failure could down the aircraft within seconds, giving gunners little chance to escape. 5. Mission frequency. Helicopter crews flew far more missions than most ground units fought engagements. The sheer exposure time, sometimes 10 to 15 sorties a day, multiplied their statistical risk, making repeated survival an exception rather than the rule.
Psychological toll. Survival itself carried a cost. Door gunners endured constant sensory overload, deafening noise, vibration, heat, and the ever-present threat of death. Many veterans reported lingering effects, nightmares, hypervigilance, and severe post-traumatic stress long after returning home. The sense of vulnerability, coupled with the intimate violence of aerial combat, left deep scars. Unlike infantry, whose enemy was often unseen, door gunners engaged targets face-to-face at close range, sometimes mere yards away. Recognition and legacy. Despite their contributions, door gunners often remained under-acknowledged in official accounts. The popular imagery of helicopter warfare, the Huey rising through smoke with its rotors whipping the air, became symbolic of the Vietnam War, but the individuals who manned those door guns were frequently overshadowed by the broader narratives of pilots or infantry combat. In recent decades, veterans associations and historical researchers have worked to correct this omission, honoring the role of the approximately 40,000 Americans who served as helicopter crew members, many of whom were door gunners or crew chiefs. Their courage reshaped the understanding of air support in modern warfare. The lessons learned from their sacrifices informed later conflicts in Grenada, Iraq, and Afghanistan, where helicopters remained vital assets, now equipped with better armor, advanced sensors, and enclosed weapon systems designed to protect the gunner. Yet even with these advancements, the spirit of the Vietnam door gunners, those young men who braved open skies and enemy fire, continues to define the ethos of combat aviation. Tactical lessons and evolution of air mobile doctrine. The Vietnam War was a proving ground for the concept of air mobility, and it fundamentally altered the way modern armies conducted warfare. The helicopter and the men who flew and fought from it became the centerpiece of a new strategy that emphasized speed, flexibility, and surprise. However, this innovation also exposed the severe limits of technology when confronted by determined, adaptive enemies and unforgiving environments. The experience of helicopter door gunners provided invaluable tactical lessons that would shape the future of combat aviation. 1. The reality of fire support in air mobile operations. Door gunners taught commanders that fire support was not merely supplementary, it was vital for the survival of both the aircraft and the troops it carried. The ability to provide suppressive fire from a moving platform allowed U.S. forces to land in zones otherwise inaccessible by ground. However, it also demonstrated that air mobility alone could not neutralize well-prepared defenses. The Viet Cong and NVA quickly adapted, turning LZs into traps by focusing all available firepower on landing or departing helicopters. Post-war tactical reviews emphasized the need for pre-landing fire preparation, the use of artillery, gunships, or airstrikes to sanitize landing zones before helicopters arrived. This lesson was learned through painful experience, often written in the loss reports of crews whose aircraft were shot down before touching ground. 2. Crew integration and situational awareness. The relationship between pilots, crew chiefs, and door gunners evolved rapidly in Vietnam. Early in the war, some missions treated door gunners as auxiliary positions, often filled by young, minimally trained soldiers. By 1967, this changed. Combat realities forced aviation units to professionalize the role. Gunners became integral members of the flight team, trained in aerial gunnery, aircraft maintenance, and emergency procedures. Their eyes were often the first line of defense. Gunners spotted muzzle flashes, enemy tracers, or movement below long before pilots could react. This practice of 360-degree crew coordination became a core doctrine for future air operations, influencing helicopter training programs that continue to this day in the U.S. Army and Marine Corps.
3. Adaptation of helicopter armament and protection. Technological innovation followed experience. Early UH-1 models were lightly armed and poorly protected. As losses mounted,
Engineers introduced changes directly inspired by crew feedback, especially from door gunners and crew chiefs. Among these adaptations, ballistic armor plates, installed along cabin floors and side panels to protect crews from small arms fire. Self-sealing fuel tanks, reduced the risk of catastrophic fires when struck by bullets. Improved mounting systems. Door gun mounts evolved from flexible pintles to articulated arms, allowing gunners greater range of motion and stability under recoil. Miniguns and rocket pods. Helicopters were modified into UH-1C-M gunship variants, featuring M134 miniguns, rocket launchers, and grenade launchers, effectively transforming transport helicopters into flying weapons platforms. These innovations laid the groundwork for the development of dedicated attacked helicopters, such as the UH-1 Cobra, which first saw combat in Vietnam in 1967. The Cobra's narrow profile, speed, and armor made it a more survivable gunship, reducing the exposure of door gunners in subsequent missions. 4. The human dimension of air combat. Perhaps the most profound lesson was psychological. The Vietnam helicopter war exposed the limits of endurance in continuous combat. Door gunners fought battles measured not by territory gained, but by survival on every sortie. Their war was immediate and personal. They saw the enemy, felt the aircraft shudder under fire, and knew that each mission might be their last. For many, the act of flying again the next day required a quiet kind of courage seldom recognized in military records. Unlike infantry units, helicopter crews could not rotate away from combat zones between engagements. They faced the enemy multiple times per day, every day, often for an entire year-long tour. Their ability to operate under these conditions reshaped the understanding of combat fatigue and resilience in modern military psychology. Studies after the war highlighted helicopter crew stress levels comparable to bomber crews of World War II, with the key difference that helicopter crews fought in small, intimate teams with direct exposure to the consequences of every decision. The lasting legacy of the door gunners. Today, the image of the door gunner on a Huey has become one of the most enduring images of the Vietnam War, captured in thousands of photographs, newsreels, and veterans' memories. It represents both the technological evolution of modern warfare and the human cost that innovation demanded. Door gunners were typically young, many only 18 or 19 years old. They were volunteers or draftees trained briefly in weapons handling before being thrust into one of the most dangerous roles of the conflict. Despite this, their effectiveness was extraordinary. The discipline and bravery they displayed under fire earned them deep respect from infantry units who depended on them. Soldiers on the ground often referred to the distinctive sound of Huey rotors as the heartbeat of hope. Their presence meant extraction, resupply, or salvation. Their absence could mean annihilation. After the war, returning door gunners, like many Vietnam veterans, received little recognition. The complex political aftermath of the war overshadowed their sacrifices. It took decades for the U.S. military and public to fully acknowledge their contribution. Memorials, veteran associations, and documentaries have since restored their rightful place in history. The names of over 58,000 Americans engraved on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial include thousands of helicopter crewmen, men who gave their lives in the skies above the jungles, often performing acts of heroism that went unrecorded.
Modern echoes. The tactical legacy of Vietnam's door gunners continues in today's military operations. Modern helicopters, the UH-60 Black Hawk, CH-47 Chinook, and HH-60 Pavehawk, all retain door-mounted gun positions. However, these are now enclosed or shielded, equipped with advanced optics, night vision, and electronic targeting systems. Armor plating, ballistic glass, and defensive countermeasures have significantly increased survivability. Yet the essence of the job, defending the aircraft and its crew, remains unchanged. In Iraq and Afghanistan, U.S. and coalition helicopter crews faced similar risks while conducting insertions, extractions, and Medevac missions under fire.
Many veterans from those conflicts have spoken of their deep respect for the Vietnam-era gunners, whose experiences formed the foundation of modern doctrine. The lineage is clear, from the open-door M60 gunners over Drang to today's stabilized M240 and GAU-21 operators. The courage remains the same. The price of air mobility. The story of Vietnam's helicopter door gunners is ultimately a story of courage meeting circumstance. They stood at the intersection of innovation and vulnerability, pioneers of a new kind of warfare that brought both unprecedented mobility and catastrophic exposure. In the narrow doors of the Huey, thousands of young Americans faced the unrelenting physics of war: light metal against heavy lead, open air against hidden enemy, courage against probability. They fought not from trenches or fortresses, but from a thin-skinned machine suspended between sky and earth, where survival often depended on reflex, teamwork, and fate. Their collective experience transformed the U.S. military's understanding of aerial combat, leading to better protected aircraft, refined tactics, and a doctrine that still governs how modern armies deploy helicopters in hostile territory. But beyond the lessons in technology and strategy, the enduring legacy of the door gunners lies in their humanity, their will to protect their comrades, to return to the skies day after day despite overwhelming odds, and to perform one of the most hazardous duties in modern military history. The names of the 2,704 aircrew members who never came home serve as a permanent reminder of the cost of that innovation. Their story is not one of despair, but of duty fulfilled under impossible conditions. In every thundering rotor, in every shadow of a helicopter over distant terrain, their legacy lives on, a testament to the courage of those who rode the doors of the Huey into history.